The chamber doors swung open with that heavy, final sound that only centuries-old wood can make. Inside Westminster, the usual political theater had been replaced with something else entirely. Real tension. The kind you feel in your chest before everything changes. MPs filed in, some checking their phones one last time, others exchanging glances that said, "We all know what this is really about." Prince William sat motionless in the gallery, his expression carved from stone. In his hand, a document. Just paper and ink to most people. But to anyone who understood the game, it was a declaration of war disguised as modernization. The reading began. Dry, procedural language about royal styles and dignities, about service and duty, about who deserves to carry the weight of a crown in their title. Nobody mentioned Meghan Markle by name. Nobody said Prince Harry out loud. They didn't have to. Every single person in that room knew exactly who this bill would cut. And across an ocean, in a mansion tucked into the Montecito hills, a phone was about to ring that would shatter whatever peace the Sussexes thought they'd built.
This is the story of how Prince William drew a line in the sand, how Meghan Markle fought back with everything she had, and how the British royals, Buckingham Palace, King Charles, and the ghost of Queen Elizabeth herself orchestrated the most devastating royal drama in modern history. This isn't just about Archie and Lilibet losing titles, it's about power, legacy, and what happens when you go to war with an institution that survived for 1,000 years. The royal news that broke that morning wasn't just an update, it was an earthquake, and the UK monarchy was about to show the world exactly how they handle threats. Before we dive into this mess, quick thing. If you're into royal gossip, royal scandal, and watching the royal entertainment unfold in real time, hit that subscribe button. We've got all the royal coverage and royal reaction you didn't know you needed. Plus, it's free, unlike those royal titles Meghan's been chasing. All right, let's get into it. The proposal itself read like something a lawyer would write after 3 espressos and a personal vendetta. Clean, precise, surgical. Royal titles and dignities shall be conferred only upon individuals actively engaged in official duties on behalf of the crown. 43 words that rewrote 300 years of tradition. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was worse than that. It was final. Senior palace aides had been waiting for this moment since the Oprah interview, since the Netflix series, since every calculated leak and emotional soundbite that painted the royal family as cold, racist, and trapped in the past. They'd watched Meghan Markle and Prince Harry build an empire on victimhood, all while keeping one foot in the royal world they claimed to despise. And now, finally, the institution was responding, not with anger, not with drama, with paperwork. William had learned something his grandmother knew instinctively. The crown doesn't argue, it simply acts. And when it acts, it doesn't need to explain itself. The media would do that. The public would do that. History would do that. All William had to do was sit there, unblinking, while the machinery of monarchy ground forward. Back in California, Meghan's mornings started normally enough. Yoga, green juice, checking overnight headlines like she always did. Then her phone started vibrating. Once, twice, a dozen times in 30 seconds. Her assistant's name flashing on the screen with that urgent tone that means something bad just happened. She picked up. 3 words from the other end made her stomach drop. They're going after the kids. The article was already everywhere. Prince William backs parliamentary reform to strip royal titles from non-working members' children. She read it once, her face going pale. Read it again, her hands starting to shake. By the 3rd time, she wasn't reading anymore. She was looking for the trap, the angle, the way to spin this.
Because Meghan Markle doesn't panic, she strategizes. But this time, there was no angle. The trap had already closed. Harry stumbled into the room, still half asleep, took one look at her face, and knew. He didn't even need to read the headline. He'd grown up in this world. He knew how the palace operated. Cold, calculated, always 3 moves ahead. And now his brother, the man he'd played with as a kid, the one who'd walked beside him at their mother's funeral, had just fired a shot across the Atlantic that couldn't be taken back.
He wouldn't, Harry said, but his voice had no conviction. Because deep down, he knew William absolutely would. Meghan turned to him, her eyes blazing with something between fury and disbelief. He just did! The word they'd both been avoiding suddenly hung in the air like smoke. Archie, Lilibet, their children, the 2 people they'd spent years trying to protect from the royal machine. And now, that machine was coming for them anyway. The clause was brutally simple. If you don't work for the crown, your kids don't get royal titles. No exceptions. No grandfather clauses, no special treatment for the Spares children living in self-imposed exile. It was the kind of rule that sounded fair on paper and felt like a guillotine in practice. And everyone knew who it was designed to hit. Meghan's first instinct was to fight back immediately. Draft a statement. Call it cruel. Call it vindictive. Make it about a grandmother's pain and children being punished for their parents' choices. Her head of PR talked her down. If you react now, you look defensive. Worse, you look guilty, like you knew this was coming. She hated that advice, hated waiting, hated letting someone else control the narrative. But she also knew he was right. By afternoon, the story had metastasized. British talk shows were calling it overdue. American pundits were split. Twitter had already chosen sides, and those sides were messy. Royal fans were celebrating. Sussex supporters were screaming betrayal. The Cambridge's official account posted a photo of William and Kate Middleton visiting a children's hospital. No statement, no comment, just business as usual. That silence, Meghan knew, was the loudest message of all. She spent the rest of the day drafting responses she'd never send. Some were angry, some were heartbroken. One started with, "As a mother, I cannot stay silent." Another opened with, "This institution has shown its true colors." Each one sounded desperate in a different way. By midnight, she'd written 14 versions and deleted them all. Because the real problem wasn't finding the right words, it was that no words would change what was happening. The crown had made its move. And for the first time since leaving royal life, Meghan had no countermove ready. Sleep didn't come easy that night in Montecito. Harry tossed and turned, caught between 2 worlds that both felt like betrayals. Meghan lay awake, her mind racing through scenarios, strategies, responses. Outside, the California night was quiet and still. Inside, a storm was building that would make their exit from royal life look like a polite disagreement. Because this wasn't just about titles anymore. It was about legacy, about what their children would inherit, about whether they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives when they walked away. And across the ocean, in palaces and parliamentary offices, the message was crystal clear. You can leave the royal family, but you can't take the crown with you. The morning headlines were savage, not because they were cruel, but because they were matter-of-fact. William's reform gains traction. 70% of Britons support title changes. Palace insiders call it long overdue. The British public, it turned out, wasn't interested in drama. They were interested in a monarchy that made sense. And paying for security, titles, and privilege for children who'd never set foot in a royal engagement, that didn't make sense. Meghan read every article, every poll, every comment section that her team begged her to ignore. She was looking for an opening, a crack in the narrative she could exploit. What she found instead was something worse than hatred: indifference. People were tired of the Sussex story, tired of the back and forth, tired of feeling like they were supposed to choose sides in a family drama that had been playing out for years. The public had moved on, and Meghan Markle, for maybe the first time in her adult life, had been left behind. Her team gathered in the Montecito estate's main room that looked more like a corporate boardroom than a home. Laptops everywhere, phones buzzing, people talking over each other with that frantic energy that comes when everyone knows the ship is sinking, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Someone suggested a statement. Someone else pitched an interview. A third voice mentioned legal action, which was immediately shot down because you can't sue Parliament for legislating. Real quick, if this royal mess is more entertaining than your actual life, smash that subscribe button. We're covering all the royal media chaos, the royal gossip nobody else will say out loud, and honestly, we're just as shocked as you are. Okay, back to the disaster. Meghan sat at the head of the table, and for the first time, her famous composure cracked. "They're trying to erase my children from history," she said. Her voice shaking with something between rage and desperation. Her PR chief, a woman who'd handled crises for A-list celebrities and political scandals, looked at her with brutal honesty. "Meghan, we're not fighting William anymore. We're fighting the institution, and the institution doesn't lose." That's when the plan shifted. If they couldn't win on titles, they'd win on sympathy. Make it about motherhood, about children being punished, about a family so cold and calculated that they'd weaponize lineage itself. It was good strategy. It might have even worked. Except for one problem. The palace wasn't done. The Times of London dropped their bombshell on a Thursday morning when most of America was still asleep. Hidden clause reveals future king's true intent, protecting the monarchy's integrity. The article laid it all out. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Harry or Meghan. It was about ensuring that royal titles meant something, that they were earned through service, not inherited like furniture. The reform, the article explained, had actually been discussed during Queen Elizabeth's final months. She'd seen what was happening, the interviews, the Netflix series, the constant monetization of royal-adjacent status, and she'd made a decision. If her grandchildren wanted to leave, they could leave, but they couldn't leave halfway. They couldn't keep one foot in the palace and one foot in Hollywood. The crown, she'd told William privately, must mean something, or it means nothing. Those words, leaked to the press with surgical precision, changed everything. Because now this wasn't William being cruel. This was William honoring his grandmother's dying wish. And you can't fight a dead queen. Meghan found out about the article from a friend who texted her before sunrise. "You need to see this." She read it on her phone, still in bed, Harry asleep beside her. When she finished, according to someone close to the situation, she screamed. Not words, just a raw sound of pure frustration. Because in one article, the palace had rewritten the entire story. They weren't the villains anymore. They were the protectors, the ones upholding tradition and duty while the Sussexes chased fame and fortune. Harry woke up to Meghan pacing the bedroom, phone pressed to her ear, already on a call with her lawyer. His first thought wasn't anger. It was resignation. He'd known this day would come, eventually, known that leaving meant losing. He just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. When Meghan finally hung up, she looked at him with eyes that demanded he choose. Right then, right there. Them or us. Harry made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He called his father. King Charles answered on the third ring, his voice tired but unsurprised. They talked for 11 minutes. Harry asked if this was really necessary. Charles explained that the monarchy wasn't a family business. It was an institution, and institutions have rules. When Harry asked what he was supposed to tell his children, Charles said something that ended the conversation. Tell them the truth, that choices have consequences. The call left Harry hollow. He'd spent years convinced that leaving was the right choice.
that protecting Meghan and building a new life was worth the cost. But sitting in that bedroom, thousands of miles from home, he wondered for the first time if he'd miscalculated. If maybe the palace wasn't the villain he'd needed them to be. If maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Meghan didn't have time for doubt. She launched what she called internally Operation Reset, a full media blitz designed to reclaim the narrative. She'd do an interview, big, emotional, devastating. She'd talk about being a mother watching her children's heritage stripped away, about institutional cruelty, about a family that values protocol over people. The booking came together fast. A major American network, primetime slot, sympathetic host. Everything was perfect, except the audience. Harry made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He called his father. King Charles answered on the third ring, his voice tired but unsurprised. They talked for 11 minutes. Harry asked if this was really necessary. Charles explained that the monarchy wasn't a family business. It was an institution, and institutions have rules. When Harry asked what he was supposed to tell his children, Charles said something that ended the conversation. Tell them the truth, that choices have consequences. The call left Harry hollow. He'd spent years convinced that leaving was the right choice, that protecting Meghan and building a new life was worth the cost. But sitting in that bedroom, thousands of miles from home, he wondered for the first time if he'd miscalculated. If maybe the palace wasn't the villain he'd needed them to be. If maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Meghan didn't have time for doubt. She launched what she called internally Operation Reset, a full media blitz designed to reclaim the narrative. She'd do an interview, big, emotional, devastating. She'd talk about being a mother watching her children's heritage stripped away, about institutional cruelty, about a family that values protocol over people. The booking came together fast. A major American network, primetime slot, sympathetic host. Everything was perfect, except the audience.
Because while Meghan was planning her redemption arc, something shifted in the cultural conversation. People started asking questions. If the titles meant so much, why did you leave? If you wanted your children to be royal, why raise them in California? If the monarchy is so terrible, why fight to stay connected to it? The contradictions that Meghan had spent years glossing over suddenly became impossible to ignore. The interview aired on a Tuesday night. Meghan wore white, sitting in a chair that cost more than most people's cars, talking about pain and betrayal. She cried at the right moments, said, "My children," with just the right amount of tremor in her voice. It should have been devastating. Instead, it felt rehearsed, calculated, like watching someone perform grief rather than feeling it. The reviews the next morning were polite but damning. Meghan pleads her case. Sussex interview falls flat. Public sympathy runs dry.
And then Buckingham Palace responded. Not with a statement, not with outrage, with 12 words that appeared in the court circular, the official record of royal activities. The Prince and Princess of Wales acted in accordance with Her late Majesty's wishes. 12 words. That was it. And it was enough, because those words did something Meghan couldn't counter. They made this about the Queen, about honoring a beloved monarch's final decision. And you can't call the Queen cruel. You can't make her the villain. She's dead, she's beloved, and she's won. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Meghan's interview, which was supposed to generate sympathy, now looked like an attack on a dead woman's legacy. Diana's name was invoked by Sussex supporters, trying to draw parallels between two women wronged by the institution. But it didn't land, because Diana never left. Diana never did tell-all interviews from California. Diana, whatever her struggles, had remained committed to her royal duties until the end. The comparison fell apart under scrutiny.
Harry watched it all unfold from Montecito. and something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse of whatever hope he'd been holding on to. He picked up the phone and called William. His brother answered but didn't speak. Harry didn't either, not at first. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Harry spoke. Was it worth it? William's response came quick and cold. You made your choices. We all did. That was the last real conversation the brothers would have. Because after that call, everything was formality. Lawyers, paperwork, official statements that read like obituaries for a relationship that had died years earlier. The bill moved through Parliament with surprising speed. First reading, second reading, committee stage, each step grinding away at whatever hope remained. And through it all, William said nothing publicly, didn't gloat, didn't explain, just watched the process unfold with the patience of someone who knew the ending before the story started.
Meghan tried one final gambit. She announced Project Radiant, a global initiative for modern leadership and humanitarian work. She positioned it as her answer to the royal family. A new kind of royalty, one based on merit and impact, not bloodline. She sent invitations to Hollywood A-listers, tech billionaires, political figures. The responses were underwhelming. Some didn't reply. Others sent polite declines. A few were honest enough to say what everyone was thinking. Backing Meghan meant opposing the crown, and nobody wanted that fight. The palace, meanwhile, did what it does best. It continued. William and Kate visited schools. Charles attended state dinners. The Queen Consort launched charity initiatives. Life in the royal family carried on as if nothing had happened, because to them, nothing had. This wasn't a crisis, it was a correction, a rebalancing of something that had gotten out of alignment. The message was clear. The monarchy doesn't need Meghan Markle. It never did.
By autumn, the bill had passed. Royal titles for Archie and Lilibet were officially denied. Not stripped, they'd never formally had them, just not granted. The legal distinction was important. It meant there was nothing to take back, no dramatic revocation, just paperwork that was never filed. The Sussex children would grow up as regular citizens, wealthy, privileged, connected, sure, but not royal, not in any official capacity. Harry's response was silence. He stopped giving interviews, stopped releasing statements. He quietly returned to the UK for a charity event, stayed in a hotel rather than a palace, and left without seeing any family members. Those who saw him described a man who looked lighter somehow. Not happy, exactly, but unburdened. Like he'd finally accepted something he'd been fighting for years. Meghan took it harder. She announced a memoir, Mother Interrupted, a story of love, loss, and legacy. The title alone sparked debate, but by the time it released, the cultural moment had passed. The book sold decently, but not spectacularly. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her vulnerability. Others called it self-indulgent. Most people just didn't care anymore. The Sussex story had run its course. The public had moved on. The final irony came 6 months later. William and Kate announced a new initiative. Royal titles for working members' children would come with real responsibility, education about duty, public service requirements, mentorship in understanding what it means to serve. It was everything Meghan had claimed to want: structure, purpose, modernization. Except it was being done without her, by the people she'd spent years calling out of touch. Meghan took it harder. She announced a memoir, Mother Interrupted, a story of love, loss, and legacy. The title alone sparked debate, but by the time it released, the cultural moment had passed. The book sold decently, but not spectacularly. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her vulnerability. Others called it self-indulgent. Most people just didn't care anymore. The Sussex story had run its course. The public had moved on. The final irony came 6 months later. William and Kate announced a new initiative. Royal titles for working members' children would come with real responsibility, education about duty, public service requirements, mentorship in understanding what it means to serve. It was everything Meghan had claimed to want: structure, purpose, modernization. Except it was being done without her, by the people she'd spent years calling out of touch. If you made it this far, you're either really invested in royal scandal, or you accidentally fell asleep with autoplay on. Either way, hit subscribe. We've got more royal commentary, more drama, and honestly, this family makes soap operas look boring. Plus, it helps the channel, unlike those royal titles, which helped absolutely nobody. The Crown's victory wasn't dramatic. There were no celebrations, no press releases declaring triumph, just a return to normal. William continued his work. Charles settled into his role as king. Kate carried on with that perfect balance of accessibility and dignity. The institution that Meghan had called antiquated and cruel had done something she never expected. It had outlasted her.
Because here's what Meghan never understood about the monarchy. It's not about individuals. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about continuation. The crown has survived wars, scandals, abdications, and revolutions. It survived Henry VIII and Edward VIII and Diana's death and Brexit. It would survive Meghan Markle too, not by fighting her, by simply waiting her out. The royal fans who'd supported the institution all along felt vindicated. The ones who defended Meghan felt betrayed, but quietly moved on to other causes. The vast majority of people just forgot the whole thing ever mattered that much. And that, more than any statement or interview or bill, was the real ending. Not with a bang, not even with a whimper, just with indifference.
Harry and Meghan still live in Montecito. They still do interviews occasionally, still launch initiatives and make appearances, but the fire is gone. The sense that they were building something revolutionary has faded into something more mundane. They're celebrities now. Wealthy, comfortable, but fundamentally ordinary. And the royal titles they fought so hard over? Their children barely know what they lost. Prince William never spoke publicly about the bill, never explained his reasoning beyond those official statements. He didn't have to, because the crown doesn't justify itself to people who've already left. It simply continues, generation after generation, outlasting every threat through the simple act of enduring. And in the end, endurance was all it needed. The lesson, if there is one, cuts both ways. The monarchy learned that it can't be all things to all people, that trying to accommodate everyone weakens the institution itself. And Meghan learned what countless others have learned before her. You can fight the crown, you can walk away from it, you can build a life outside it, but you cannot control it. You cannot bend it to your will. It was here before you, it'll be here after you, and it genuinely doesn't care if you stay or go.
Today, when people mention the Sussexes, it's with a kind of nostalgic distance. Remember when that was a huge deal? Remember when we all picked sides? It feels like ancient history, even though it happened just yesterday. Because the crown, in its infinite patience, has the ultimate advantage. It measures time in centuries. And against that timeline, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were just a moment. A brief disruption in a story that's been unfolding for 1,000 years and will continue for 1,000 more. The monarchy didn't destroy them. It didn't need to. It just waited. And in that waiting, it proves something fundamental about power. The loudest voice doesn't always win. The best story doesn't always triumph. Sometimes the thing that wins is the thing that simply refuses to end. The crown endures. Everything else is just noise.